Chapter 2, Road Trip to the Edge. Knowing her ex had access through friends to everything he needed to find her, Ivy immediately began creating 2 false trails to keep him busy. One of his closest friends, Frank, aka Flyboy, worked for Homeland Security. Kat, a fellow soldier, worked for Mac, and Doc Ivanov worked for the Black Ops group, Volk. It was almost a year into their marriage before she realized his travel wasn't for work. It was for Volk. Then his web of lies began to unravel. After taking a bus to Buffalo, New York, Ivy took a train to Niagara Falls in Canada, where she nervously held her breath as she used her new enhanced driver's license to cross the border. Later, she got back on the train and in less than 2 hours arrived in Toronto, Canada. Bone-tired, with a crushing headache, unable to think about food, she stumbled off the train. While in Toronto, she used a credit card while she shopped in several shops. Against her true nature, she intentionally dropped and broke a jar, which she paid for, of course. She knew he would check out the shops listed on the credit card bill. She hoped a clerk or employee would remember her and keep him wasting his time by following the false trail she was trying desperately to create. All Ivy wanted to do was to get to the sea before he unraveled her diversion. Once she made it to the coast, she would move from town to town and hope she'd find a place to live off the grid. She also made a reservation in a hotel where she checked in, put up a do not disturb sign, and immediately took a shuttle to the airport. Using her new name, she booked a flight to Calgary, Canada. Her stomach was in knots. Bleary-eyed, she boarded on a nonstop flight from Calgary to Cancun, Mexico, for her plan in Mexico was to leave breadcrumbs for Ian. Once she made sure the plane was safe, she closed her eyes for a few minutes of sleep. In Cancun, she used her real name to check into a hotel for a week, where she showered before putting up a do not disturb sign again and leaving. Then, using her new name, she purchased a ticket on a nonstop flight from Cancun to Idaho Falls, Idaho. While in the air, the stewardess rolled the food cart down the aisle. All she wanted was ice water. Ivy adored good food. She had one of those metabolisms everyone envies. She could eat whatever she wanted and burn it off, staying lean. Usually, she was glad she could eat whatever she wanted. Now, her nail-biting anxiety had her wasting away until her selection of black clothing hung loosely on her shrinking frame. I miss my beautiful kitchen. She remembered opening the drawers full of her beloved stainless steel cups, spoons, and whisks. She closed her eyes and imagined her bare feet on the cold stone floor, flour everywhere, even in her hair. The things she missed most were the simple things like her collection of new and rare cookbooks, like the ritual of measuring, pouring, and watching bread rise. Her stomach growled. The plane landed in Idaho Falls. There was still snow on the ground. She put on her hoodie and walked the mile from the airport to the bus station. She threw away a burner phone in a gas station garbage and made sure the one Darlene had given her was still in her pack and turned off. She paid cash for a ticket on a plane to Portland, Oregon. All Ivy wanted to do was sleep. She kept her hood up as she boarded the bus. Then she put her headphones on so no one would talk to her and picked a seat far from the driver and the 5 other passengers. She was asleep before the bus pulled out of the station. Ivy had a backpack between her and the window of the bus. Her eyes were closed and she was on the edge of waking when the bus pulled to a stop. She opened her eyes long enough to know they were in another station. The bus was almost completely empty when the driver fired up the engine to pull out of Baker, Oregon. An older woman with iron gray hair, wearing a flannel shirt and overalls, could have sat any place on the bus, but she picked the seat next to Ivy. Annoyed, Ivy adjusted her backpack pillow and pretended to sleep until she heard a rapid clicking sound. Opening one eye, she peeked just long enough to see knitting needles weaving away, hands flying, as the woman pulled cream-colored yarn from the bag on the floor. Eventually, Ivy dozed off. When the bus slipped on the icy road, the woman put her arm across Ivy like she was a human seatbelt, waking her. Oh, sorry, love. Ivy yawned and thought the woman reminded her of Gladys. Kind eyes. It's okay. Where are we? Dead Man's Pass. She knit a few stitches. Is that really a thing? Ivy sat straight up, stretching, and looked out the window at the snow-dusted evergreens bordering the highway. Clean, white snow hugged icy roads and blew like sand across the pavement. It's definitely a thing. This part of the trip is why I don't drive myself when I visit my sister in Baker, Oregon. She picked her knitting back up and silently mouthed the words as she counted loop stitches. Name's Agnes. Agnes Bates. She hesitated. Ivy. Ivy Kelly. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes. Where are you headed? There it was. The question everyone on the trip asked, and the question she didn't want to answer. She decided that rather than answer it, she would distract Agnes. I love what you're knitting. What is it? Oh, it's just a dish rag. I sell them in my tea shop at Balefire Bay. She gave Ivy a quick smile and went back to knitting. I learned to crochet once, Ivy said. You did? Did you like it? Ivy nodded, not realizing what she was getting herself into. Hours later, the bus pulled into a truck stop. She and Agnes were chatting like they were old friends. Not about anything deep, but about tea, books, and knitting. Ivy cast off the last stitch in a squared dish rag. There you go. Nicely done. Agnes picked up the red square and examined it. You're a natural. Ivy smiled. Thanks for making the time fly by. She realized she hadn't thought about Ian for hours. Most of the riders got off the bus, talking or texting on their cells, and walking into the truck stop. Are you hungry? We could grab a burger. They have a fast food place on the other side of the truck stop, just past the showers, Agnes said. Ivy shook her head. Frankly, I would love a shower, but we don't have time. I'm just going to get some bottled water. How far are we from Portland? You're right on the outskirts, in Troutdale. Do you live in Portland? Agnes asked. Ivy did her best to look calm, yet again, while she had to be vague and less than honest when she answered the question. No, I finished my degree. I'm going to apply for work and hopefully find a place to live. Oh, what do you think your parents think about you moving away? Agnes raised her brows and looked concerned. They passed away in an accident last year. It's just me. I'm so sorry I even asked. Ivy held up her hand to stop Agnes. No, seriously, it's okay. I'm completely happy on my own. It means I get to pick where my next adventure starts. I want to live closer to the ocean, and in Portland, there's a few possibilities for work. Okay, Agnes hesitated. But would you take some advice from an old lady? Don't choose a big city like Portland. You've heard about the riots in the last few years and the problems in the parks. COVID, you know. Ivy felt a knot in her empty stomach. She narrowed her eyes and studied Agnes's face. Agnes seemed sincere. She tilted her head and said, Go on. Well, it may be just fine for you, but I'm a small town girl and I like knowing my neighbors in Balefire Bay. We take care of each other. Sure, everyone knows your business, but if your nose is clean, who cares? Agnes shrugged. My hometown is expensive, but it's nothing compared to the rent in Portland. Rent is so out of control. Portland has a real problem with homelessness and crime. Ivy chewed on her lip and studied Agnes, who looked authentically distressed. My degree is in library sciences. I'm a research librarian. I doubt there's much call for that in a small town. Ivy shrugged, hoping Agnes wouldn't ask any more questions. Oh, Agnes thought for a minute. And then her eyes widened, and she started bouncing on her toes. Yes, there is. She clapped her hands together and beamed. I know someone. I have a neighbor who has a rare book collection and library. He just built a new house and is looking for help to catalog his collection and inventory his rare books. She looked positively proud of herself. Will there be places to rent that I can afford? Well, that depends on if you can afford free room and board. Free? Ivy's breath hitched. What's the catch? Nothing. I promise. I can't believe you sat by me on the bus, Agnes said. Ivy chuckled, but didn't remind Agnes that it was she who had sat by her. Maybe she's a little dotty. Maybe she's following me. He's offering a low-cost cottage with the job. He might even make it free for the right person. I'll text him. Agnes pulled out her phone. Too good to be true. Ivy reached out and touched Agnes's hand to stop her from texting. Where is Balefire Bay, and what's a balefire? Using her hands and bouncing excitedly, Agnes said, It's a lighthouse. The word balefire is just another word for lighthouse. Balefire has one. Well, my friend owns the lighthouse now. When it was decommissioned, he bought it and the surrounding land. I run the tea shop in town, inside the bookstore. Our book club has tea and coffee together in the shop most mornings. Does he need someone to work in the bookstore? Agnes shook her head no. He doesn't own the bookstore. Jessica does. You'd love her. No, my friend built a private library in his home. He's the real deal. Okay, it isn't a research library, but it's books, right? If you love books, you love books. Anyway, whoa, slow down. Ivy couldn't help grinning from ear to ear. She wiggled her brows and chuckled. So you think that I can really make a living in Balefire Bay? I can't believe we met each other. It's like it's meant to be. Kismet, fate. Does fate pay a living wage? Ivy asked, still chuckling. It used to be the smallest town, and our kids all moved away for school and work. Then people like my friend began building or renovating our old Victorian houses and shops. During COVID, our kids moved back with their degrees. A lot of them work from home now. Now it's a rich man's town, but it keeps us locals employed. We still belong, and so would you. I thought small town locals hated newcomers, Ivy said. You wouldn't be a newcomer. I know you. I'd introduce you around, and everyone will love you. Agnes clasped her hands in front of her, pleading and still bouncing on her toes. Agnes, why do you care where I go? Smiling, she said, because you remind me of me a long time ago. Ivy took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I'll tell you what. I need to use the restroom and get some water. I'm going to do that, and let's chat on the bus. What do you think? Perfect, Agnes said. She followed Ivy to the ladies' room, still happily describing all the things she loved about Balefire Bay. As they entered Portland, Ivy watched the city go by while Agnes was acting like a tourist guide, talking about all of its problems. And then there was the pandemic, you know, Agnes said. This freeway always had a little graffiti, but this is different. It's people, you know. COVID wasn't just a killer, it broke their spirit. The price of food as well, you know. People that were on the edge just fell off. They passed broken windows, boarded up businesses, spray-painted signs of recent riots, tents and people sleeping in the rhododendrons alongside the freeway. It wasn't anything like the pictures Ivy found when she Googled Portland universities and its libraries. The more Agnes talked, the more discouraged Ivy became. There would always be homeless in every city, but she somehow envisioned Portland as a gleaming city with a university library, a short drive from the beach. Where's the ocean? Ivy asked. Agnes raised her brows and looked over the top of her reading glasses. Just as I thought. Everyone comes to the coast to run away or live a romantic life by the sea. They don't realize that although Portland is on a river that runs to the sea, the ocean is a good 2 hours west of the city. Ivy fell back into the bus seat and rubbed her eyes with both hands. She sighed and asked, And Balefire Bay? Is it on a river or the ocean? She had no idea why living by the ocean was so important, other than she'd always wanted to, and the dream kept her going in the hard times and made going to the shelter bearable. Balefire is right on the ocean. I can sit on my back deck and watch the whales in the bay. I'm not a boarding house. My cats own my spare bedroom, but you could sleep in my little office until you find a place. Ivy's antenna went up. Well, that's really nice, but why would you do that for me? Because when I came to Balefire with my boyfriend in 1973, we broke up in the parking lot of Mother Nature's market. He left and I was stranded. Jessica and the good people of Balefire took me in, gave me work, and became my family. Okay, we argue and fight like regular families, but we look after each other. You look to me like you could use a family. Normal families can do some pretty awful things, Ivy said, applying chapstick to her bottom lip to remind herself not to chew it raw with nerves. Agnes picked her knitting back up and rapidly ran through a row. She changed directions, and while her needles flew, she said, "Every family has problems. Balefire's no different. Just a few weeks ago, a lovely young woman fell from the cliffs in the county park by the lighthouse and died." Agnes's eyes clouded over. "I'm so sorry," Ivy offered. "That sounds like a horrible accident." "Accident?" Her knitting needles sailed away. "Maybe." A shiver went up Ivy's spine. Agnes looked up from her work and out the window. "We're close to the bus station. I have to make my connection to Balefire 20 minutes after we arrive. I have to run to the coast bus every time. It's the only bus that goes out to the coast. They leave tonight at 6. There isn't another bus going until tomorrow." At that moment, they pulled under an overpass. Ivy could see a tent city and a park along the river. The sun would be setting soon. Traffic was bumper to bumper. There were electric trains, but she couldn't see any yellow cabs. "Does that," she pointed at the train, "make it to Balefire?" Agnes chuckled. "The max? No, dearie. It only runs to Hillsboro. The coast is another hour west of Hillsboro. You can arrange a cab for $200 or Uber. I take the coast bus for 20. Ivy closed her eyes and weighed her options. She didn't really trust Agnes, or anyone for that matter. For all she knew, she was being led to her death. People know who to trust. She'd read a book once that said she should make decisions by tuning into her gut and going with her feelings. What am I feeling? She tried to just feel Agnes. Is nothing good or bad? I have no idea. What are my other options? "End of the line," the bus driver announced as they pulled into the station. Ivy's eyes flew open. It looked like any other bus station, but with more people camping out. She looked at Agnes, who was quickly packing her knitting away and gathering her things. Brave. The word intentional came to mind. Where did that come from? I would be taking an intentional risk. It's probably fine. I shouldn't let my trust issues cloud all of my decisions, right? Agnes stepped into the aisle, zipped up her coat, and picked up her bags. "Okay, may I come with you to Balefire Bay?" Ivy said. "But when the sun rises, if I don't like it, I'm moving on." "Sure thing, dearie." Agnes gave her a knowing look. "You'll want to zip your coat up. It's not that cold, but the damp chills you to the bone." The coast bus was much like the Greyhound, but cleaner. There were only 6 people on board. Ivy had applied her chapstick 2 more times and absent-mindedly chewed her pinky nail to a nub as the bus rounded through a mountain covered in pine trees. The sunset was orange and red over the ocean when the bus drove south along the high cliffs and down to the next town. It took Ivy's breath away. She had been all over the world. She'd watched the sunrise on the East Coast, but this was different. It was hard to explain. It was a rugged beauty, surrounded by miles and miles of lush green forest that Agnes said was a rainforest. "We're here, love," Agnes said. The bus pulled off Highway 101, taking a narrow road through the woods for a few miles before pulling into an empty parking lot outside a little market. "Balefire Bay's last stop." Agnes gathered her things. Ivy put her backpack on and zipped her coat. The night was clear when the bus pulled away. The air smelled of fish and pine trees. Somehow the smell, although different, was wonderful. There were endless stars over the ocean, and then there was the sound, the roaring sound of the tide and waves dashing against the rocks, rhythmic and constant. "Do you have a car?" Ivy asked. "I do." "Where is it?" "Right there." She pointed to an older Subaru wagon pulling in and parking. The SUV's window opened. A man with a baseball hat pulled down over his face, a black beard, and shoulder-length black hair was driving. A shiver went up Ivy's spine. Silently, she adjusted her pack, thinking about running while trying to calm herself down. Okay, she thought. She looks a little like Kathy Bates, but this isn't misery. I have some serious trust issues. Hi, Mom. Ivy studied him. Mom? He got out of the car and unfolded, becoming a 6'2" muscular man, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans with an unzipped hoodie. He hugged Agnes, and Ivy breathed a sigh of relief. He loves his mother. That makes him a good man, right? I don't know what I was worried about. She smiled, and then another thought went through her mind. Norman Bates loved his mother, too. What is it with all the bad Bates? She watched him put his mother's luggage in the back of the car. Agnes chattered about her sister and their trip, but Ivy couldn't take it all in. All she could hear was the blood pumping in her ears and the rhythmic tide. Agnes motioned for Ivy to join them. Ivy took a step back. He opened the passenger door behind the driver's door and waited, motionless. She took another step back. His shoulders dropped. His face was expressionless. It's okay, dearie, Agnes called. If this was a movie, the audience would be screaming at me to stop. Don't get in the car. Don't get in the car. She looked around. The entire town was shut down for the night. Oh, well, I asked for a new adventure. Ivy squared her shoulders and got into the car and hiccuped. The sound of a cat meowing and scratching Agnes's office door woke Ivy. A gray paw reached under the door, catching its claws on the carpet, meowing. Wrapping one of Agnes's afghans tightly around her shoulders, Ivy put her feet on the cold wooden floor. The smell of cinnamon and fresh-baked bread permeated the air. Her hands went to her waist to touch her money belt hidden under her shirt. Automatically feeling the size of the packet while her eyes searched for her backpack. It was untouched, on the floor near her feet. It was dark outside when she'd arrived at Agnes's home. Thankfully, Agnes's son didn't live with her. He left after making sure they were safely in the house. Agnes's home was a pleasant surprise. It was like something Miss Marple would live in, all chintz and teapots. It was so dark, Ivy couldn't see the view from Agnes's home when they arrived. The entire west wall of her home was a series of windows without curtains. Ivy walked to a window, mesmerized by the beauty of the view. She could clearly see the endless Pacific Ocean beyond Balefire Bay's eclectic rooftops. The sea rose and fell in a series of swells with whitecaps to the horizon, under gray storm clouds rolling in from the southwest. She couldn't look away. Meow. A gray cat scratched at the door. Breaking the magic of the moment, a paw reached under the door, searching. Ivy smiled. She adjusted the clothes she'd slept in and ran a brush through her hair. After checking her brown waves using a compact, she put her black beanie on and put on her backpack. The door squeaked when she opened it. It startled her furry guest. The cat scurried down a short hall into another room. Ivy followed it into a bright kitchen. Agnes was bent over, pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls out of the oven. The cat skittered back out of the room when Ivy came in. Good morning, Agnes smiled. Excuse Sir's scratches a lot. He's a nervous Nellie. She wore a pink flannel shirt and another pair of coveralls. Her gray hair was in a tight ponytail at the nape of her neck. I'm going to make us some breakfast. After we eat, I'll take you down to my shop in the bookstore to meet my friend. You know, the one I was telling you about? Xander? I texted him last night. He'll meet us at the Balefire Bay Books and Tea Shop. He'd love to talk to you after our usual tea, coffee, and local gossip with the book club. Thank you, Ivy said. I love the smell of baked cinnamon rolls. Reading is my passion, but baking is one of my favorite ways to relax. We'll have to exchange recipes. I'd love that. I have my grandmother's recipe memorized. I love baking almost as much as I love eating. She smiled, but her stomach lurched, making her wonder if she would ever feel like eating again. I'm always looking for ways to make a better cinnamon roll. I'm so glad we met. I can't wait for you to meet my book club friend, Debbie. She's going to love you. She enjoys baking, too. She makes the most amazing pastries, Agnes said. My grandmother was a wonderful baker. Some of my best memories were made in her kitchen. Ivy tried to leave details out of the story, like the fact that her grandmother lived in the Hawaiian Islands before she passed away. Ivy knew she was taking a risk by meeting people, especially people who gossiped. Maybe what happened wasn't her fault, but she knew how judgmental people could be. She'd been one of those people, the kind that thought they knew everything, only to find out there was a whole other world backstage behind the heavy red velvet curtains of pretense. Losing her job had always been her greatest fear. Still, when she walked away from it, she was surprised to see how much cutting her only thread to the outside world impacted her. Ian told everyone she was burned out. She joined his charade and kept a pretense to avoid campus and faculty gossip. Ivy walked to the windows on the west side of the kitchen and gasped. A fishing boat was riding the swells and heading toward shore. She watched it run straight up a wave until the bow hovered for a moment and then slammed down on the whitecap. The bow pitched forward and slid down the back of the wave, only to conquer the next. She stood mesmerized with her hands on the cold glass, watching the boat fight the wind and waves. The world lit up and thunder rolled across the bay. Quietly, Agnes stood next to her. Ivy glanced at her but couldn't look away from the boat. Pointing, she asked, "Where'll the boat dock?" "That's my son's boat." Eyes wide, Ivy looked at Agnes. "Will he be okay?" "He docks in the harbor just south of town. For him, it's just another day at work. Although lightning doesn't happen often." She pointed to the right, or north. "Do you see the north head and the lighthouse?" Ivy looked. "Are the waves always like that, crashing against the cliffs?" Agnes smiled. "In the winter months they are." She pointed at the opposite side of the bay where the little boat was still struggling. Expensive-looking homes covered a small point of land on the south side of the bay. "That's South Point. Get it?" Ivy nodded and looked back and forth between the points. The north head was covered in evergreens, giving way to a grassy field and the lighthouse. "See the bridge on the south side of downtown? It's a suspension bridge that leads to the southern head. Under the bridge is the mouth of Balefire Harbor. There's a narrow inlet, or bar. The harbor isn't very big. It holds a large dry dock and small ships, a few sailboats and charter fishing boats." At that moment, the boat sped up. Ivy held her breath. It looked like it would run straight into the cliffside, but it didn't. It rode a wave under the bridge and into the harbor that was hidden from her view. Agnes sat down and looked out at the ocean. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I did on the bus, but..." "What was he fishing for?" Ivy asked. "Crab. It's still crabbing season." "Is Connor your only child?" "He is. He loves fishing, but boats are expensive habits. He also works as an officer in a small 5-man, 1-woman police force." Ivy sat at the table across from Agnes, wrapped her arms around her waist. Again, Ivy sat at the table across from Agnes, wrapped her arms around her waist, and tried to remain calm. "A police officer? The last thing I need is for him to wonder why his mother is helping me and start digging into my past." It didn't matter how sweet Agnes was. Ivy needed to leave Balefire Bay as soon as she could. "I left a towel and some toiletries in the bathroom," Agnes said. "You're welcome to take a shower before we go. Dress in warm clothes and we can walk to the shop when you're done." Hi, I'm Shannon Symonds and I'm the author, and I'm recording these to help me find all my mistakes. It's kind of something I do. I read my books aloud before I publish them. I just made a trip this last weekend and I went to a place called Depot Bay. Some people call it the smallest harbor on the West Coast, but I'm not sure about that fact. But I do know that Depot Bay is gorgeous. And it's kind of what I patterned Balefire Bay after, but I kind of mashed it up with Newport. So Newport has a beautiful lighthouse. And if you go on my Instagram account at Shannon Symonds author, you'll see that that I have pictures of Depot Bay because I was just there last weekend. It was a little research, I told myself, but not really. It was just a lot of fun with my grandkids. So the lighthouse at Newport is tall and white. It's decommissioned, I'm pretty sure. There's no light in it. But you can go out and you can stand on the cliffs, which are about 1,200 feet up, possibly higher at some points. There's large rocks, and there's cormorant birds that live on the larger rocks out at sea. There's a bay, an agate beach. There are beautiful agates that roll up, and we like to collect if we can find some. I don't even know how to describe the beauty. It's like you stand on the edge of the cliff by the lighthouse and you can see, you just realize how vast the ocean is and how small you are and how amazing it is that we're brave enough to go out on it. Depot Bay is the first place that I ever went deep sea fishing with my son, and that's a spectacular story. I'll tell it sometime in my newsletter, but Depot Bay is also the first place that I got to take a whale watching charter out with my daughter, and we went out. It wasn't very expensive. It was about 40 feet long. It had a bathroom, which is very important to people like me, and lots of people were on board. But we went out in the little bay and we followed whales the entire time we were on the boat, maybe an hour or two. At one point, a long whale pulled up alongside the ship and rolled over, and I could see his eye. And he just looked at me, and it was kind of one of my favorite moments in life. I love whales. I've always loved seeing their spouts, but I had never been that close other than in an aquarium. So I'd gone back a couple more times, and each time it was just as fabulous as the time before. I wish you could go with me. So if you're ever in Oregon, go to Depot Bay, find a whale watching charter, not the Zodiac. You need the one with the bathroom. Trust me, you're going to be out for a while. And if you're ever in Newport, there's 2 lighthouses, and they're both worth going to. Absolutely. So, oh, and don't forget the Newport Aquarium. I hope you get to travel to Oregon someday. It is a rainforest. It is rugged. It is beautiful. And it also reminds me daily just how gifted and blessed we are to be here, and how small I am in this whole great big world. So thanks for listening. And chapter 3 is coming next week, and hopefully it'll be better than this one, where I learned to use all this equipment and cut out my whistling S's and my spaces.